Carl Jung exposed the final stage of the empath that Jung called dangerous. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In this video, we explore the final stage of the empath that Jung himself warned could become dangerous, not because empathy is wrong, but because when left unchecked, it can trap you in cycles that steal your energy and happiness. At Spiritual Wisdom, our mission is to help you recognize these hidden patterns and transform them into strength for personal growth and spiritual awakening. As you listen, I invite you to reflect. Have you ever felt your empathy turn into a burden instead of a gift? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's begin this journey together. 1. Empaths as hidden geniuses. Jung never viewed empaths as weak victims, but as hidden geniuses, souls who silently absorb and catalog the emotional storms around them with almost surgical precision. What looks like fragility from the outside is in fact an inner laboratory, a psychological war room where every manipulation, every subtle abuse, every toxic pattern is observed, stored, and mapped with striking clarity. This is the stage where spirituality and spiritual awakening meet raw human psychology, where the empath is no longer a sponge soaking up pain, but an alchemist transforming poison into wisdom. Instead of being consumed by guilt trips, gaslighting, or love bombing, they begin to see them as patterns, not as personal failures. They notice the shallow breath before a lie, the forced smile that masks control, and the cycle of intermittent kindness meant to bind them. At this final stage, which Jung called dangerous, the empath becomes untouchable, not because they harm others, but because they cannot be manipulated in the old ways anymore. They have learned to pause rather than react, to name the tactic instead of drowning in confusion, and to walk away without fear when their dignity is at stake. They can recognize triangulation when a third party is pulled in to twist the narrative, and they disarm it with truth. They sense the invisible strings of control, and they cut them without anger, simply with awareness. This is where compassion gains edges, where kindness is paired with boundaries, and where presence itself becomes an unspoken authority. The empath, once dismissed as overly sensitive, now carries an aura that unsettles manipulators because their games no longer work. Their spirituality has matured into precision, love that discerns, love that protects, love that no longer sacrifices itself to feed others' shadows. This transformation is why Jung saw them as dangerous. They have evolved beyond being pawns on the board. They no longer play the game, and the moment they step away, the manipulator loses their power. If you're ready to embrace the hidden genius within you, show your commitment by commenting below. I will awaken. 2. The breaking point. Betrayal as catalyst. Betrayal is not just a wound, but the breaking point where an empath's entire identity is shattered. And yet, it is in this very shattering that their greatest transformation begins. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And for the empath, this pain rarely comes through small lessons. It comes through one devastating betrayal from someone they trusted completely. In that moment, the ground beneath them collapses. But instead of falling apart as the world expects, something extraordinary happens. They become unnaturally calm. This calm is not emptiness. It is the silence of awakening, the merging of shadow and consciousness, where they finally stop denying the darkness within and embrace it as part of their wholeness. This transformation is the integration Jung described, the point where the empath no longer projects goodness outward in blind trust, but begins to see reality as it truly is. The betrayal strips away illusions and forces them to turn inward, and in doing so, they reclaim the power they had given away. Jung's spiritual wisdom teaches us that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this is exactly what occurs when the empath learns to walk into the shadow, to face it, and to accept it as part of their strength. Their calm becomes dangerous, not in the sense of destruction, but because it makes them untouchable. They no longer seek validation. They no longer collapse under rejection, and they no longer depend on others for their sense of worth. The empath who has passed through betrayal rises with an energy that unsettles others, for they now carry the weight of truth. Their presence is sharp, discerning, able to cut through illusions and lies, and this clarity makes them immune to manipulation. They embody Jung's words, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The betrayal that once seemed to destroy them has instead forged them into something unshakable, and their calmness radiates as a sign of mastery rather than weakness. This is the final stage Jung warned of the dangerous empath, because once they have integrated both light and shadow, once they have seen through the games of betrayal and survived, they cannot be broken again. They are no longer bound by fear, for they have faced the deepest loss and emerged whole, carrying within them the living proof that pain, when faced, becomes power. Have you ever faced betrayal that became the turning point of your life? If you believe it can be the catalyst for transformation, declare it in the comments. I rise stronger from betrayal. 3. Shadow integration and clarity. This shift was never about revenge, but about truth. Because when an empath reaches the stage Carl Jung described as dangerous, silence is no longer seen as compassion, but as betrayal of the self. And instead of absorbing manipulation and carrying unspoken lies, they begin to expose them with striking clarity. What once felt like a burden of sensitivity now transforms into discernment, a sharp awareness that sees through illusions and reveals hidden motives. And this is where shadow integration becomes real. For as Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the empath who integrates the shadow embodies that courage to bring the unseen into the light. They no longer fear judgment, for they know that truth itself heals, and real spirituality is not about clinging to false harmony or masking reality with empty positivity, but about daring to name the darkness and stand unshaken in the face of it. At this stage, their voice carries a power that unsettles those who benefit from deception. And this is why Jung called it dangerous, not because the empath seeks harm, but because their clarity dismantles illusions that others work hard to protect, making them a mirror that reflects reality back to those who fear it. Relationships begin to shift. People who once relied on their silence feel threatened, and the empath may feel alone in this transition. Yet this loneliness is part of their spiritual growth, because wholeness always requires letting go of roles that no longer serve the soul. When the shadow is integrated, there is no longer a split between the inner self and the outer mask, and the empath stands whole, unshaken by manipulation, no longer confusing kindness with compliance or compassion with silence, but recognizing that silence in the face of falsehood is complicity, while truth, though sharp, is liberation. In embodying this final stage, the empath discovers that their gift was never just sensitivity, but the power to reveal truth, a power that becomes both shield and light, guarding their own spirit while guiding others toward freedom. And here lies the essence of spirituality, not as an escape, but as transformation, not as passive endurance, but as active clarity. Spiritual growth demands this courage to face what is hidden, to speak what is true, and to live in alignment with the soul's integrity. The empath who reaches this stage is no longer an absorber of pain, but a revealer of reality, someone who embodies Jung's deepest insight, that the light we seek can only be found by making peace with the shadow. If the power of shadow integration and clarity speaks to you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your path toward deeper self-mastery and spiritual wisdom unfolds with every lesson. 4. From victim to strategic power. From victim to strategic power is the stage where the empath's entire life transforms, and Carl Jung described it as dangerous, not because you turn cruel or unfeeling, but because you finally awaken to your true strength and begin living with conscious strategy rather than unconscious sacrifice. When empathy is integrated, you still care, you still feel, but you no longer bleed endlessly for every story or carry every burden. Instead, you become selective, discerning, and deliberate, practicing spirituality and spiritual awakening in their most grounded form. In this stage, your empathy becomes a refined instrument, not a leaking vessel. You learn to regulate your emotions before responding, to read the subtle currents beneath words, and to give your energy where it truly matters, not where it will be exploited. In daily life, this shift reveals itself in simple but powerful acts. You listen deeply and then calmly say, "No, that's not for me." You ask one piercing question that dissolves manipulation. You stand in silence before provocation, radiating the unshakable presence that says, "I see you, but I will not enter your game." Because your boundaries are clear and your energy is no longer porous, manipulators instinctively feel uneasy in your presence and drift away, while authentic souls feel safe, inspired, and magnetically drawn to you. This is selective empathy, warm but wise, compassionate but not careless, a flame that gives light without burning itself out. Here, silence becomes your strategy, distance becomes medicine, and your time itself becomes a declaration of your values. You enter difficult rooms without losing yourself, release toxic loops without drama, and turn old wounds into signals for wiser choices. Power in this stage is not domination. It is alignment of your heart and your principles standing as one. The empath who once drowned in the tides of others' emotions now becomes the lighthouse, guiding with clarity, shining with truth, and proving that the final form of empathy is not softness without strength, but tenderness guarded by discernment, a force that unsettles deception and empowers authenticity wherever it flows. Comment below, "I rise with strategic power," if you are ready to step out of victimhood and embrace your true strength. 5. The dangerous gift. These awakened empaths carry within them an extraordinary gift, a gift that Carl Jung himself both admired and feared. for their ability to read others goes far beyond intuition and enters a realm that feels almost supernatural. With piercing clarity, they can perceive not only surface emotions, but the hidden wounds, the secret motives, and the silent cries buried deep within the human heart. To stand before such a person is to feel as though your soul is laid bare, every mask slipping away effortlessly. Jung called this final stage dangerous, not because empathy itself is harmful, but because when empathy becomes absolute, it holds the power to heal profoundly or to manipulate with equal intensity. He once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." And this truth becomes the very foundation of the empath's responsibility. For without mastering their own shadows, their gift can become a weapon disguised as compassion. The perfectly empathetic soul holds in their hands a paradox, for their very presence can soothe a wounded heart and restore hope with nothing more than a word or a touch. Yet if corrupted by ego or pain, that same presence can subtly control, influence, and even enslave the spirit of another. Imagine looking into the eyes of someone carrying unspeakable sorrow and knowing, without them speaking, the full weight of their story. In that moment, the awakened empath can either breathe life into them by affirming their resilience or bend them toward dependency by exploiting their vulnerability. This is why Jung called it dangerous, because the same gift that elevates the empath to healer can, if unchecked, transform them into a manipulator of souls. Where there is light, there must also be shadow, Jung reminded us, and the brighter the empath's light shines, the more carefully they must confront and integrate the shadow that follows. At this stage, empathy is no longer just a feeling, but an energy that permeates everything, a vibration that others unconsciously respond to. The empath becomes like an instrument, capable of playing melodies that lift spirits into harmony, or tones that fracture trust and sow confusion. The true challenge is not in reading others, for that ability comes naturally, but in reading themselves, recognizing the temptation of power, the lure of control, and the subtle arrogance that can creep in under the mask of helping. Jung's spiritual wisdom reminds us that the final transformation of the empath is not about gaining mastery over others, but about mastering the self, aligning the gift of deep perception with humility, integrity, and love. He famously said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for the awakened empath, this means embracing their role not as an owner of other people's truths, but as a guide who helps others discover their own. Thus, the dangerous gift is a sacred reminder that spiritual awakening magnifies choice. It does not erase the possibility of darkness, it simply sharpens the edges of responsibility. The awakened empath must walk a narrow path, choosing again and again to heal instead of harm, to serve instead of control, to liberate instead of bind. The gift is not to be feared, but to be honored with reverence, for within its duality lies the true test of transformation. The empath's greatest danger is never what they perceive in others. It is what they fail to see in themselves. And only by confronting that inner shadow can their gift remain a light in the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom for more insights on Carl Jung's stages of transformation and how you can turn your empathic journey into a source of true power. 6. Stages of transformation. The first stage of transformation, recognition, marks the moment when an empath begins to reclaim their intelligence, their strength, and their sacred boundaries. Too often, those with deep sensitivity mistake compassion for self-sacrifice, pouring out their energy until there is nothing left. In recognition, however, you realize that this very sensitivity is not a flaw, but a rare gift. And like any gift of great value, it demands protection. As Carl Jung once reminded us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This stage is about making the unconscious patterns of pain visible, breaking free from cycles of giving without receiving, and learning to say no without guilt. Boundaries are no longer heavy walls, but conscious doors, which you alone have the power to open or close. You no longer allow life to be dictated by old wounds or by others' expectations. Instead, you step into the clarity of self-possession. From there, the journey unfolds into integration, the weaving together of shadow and light into one complete self. Here, the true work begins, for it is easy to embrace the parts of yourself that shine, but much harder to accept the parts that the world once rejected or that you were taught to deny. Jung warned us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Integration is not a quest for perfection, but for wholeness, a willingness to sit with your anger, grief, fear, and envy, not as enemies, but as teachers. You begin to understand that every shadow holds within it a hidden strength. Every wound conceals wisdom, and every scar is a mark of growth. To integrate is to stop running from yourself and instead bring every part of your being into dialogue. This is where spirituality deepens, because true spiritual growth is not the escape from suffering, but the ability to transform suffering into wisdom, compassion, and balance. The final stage, application, is where transformation crystallizes into action, and the empath truly becomes what Jung described as dangerous. But this danger does not stem from harm. It comes from liberation. It is the danger of someone who cannot be manipulated, who sees clearly through illusions, who walks with unshakable courage and intention. Emotional intelligence, once a burden, becomes a shield and a compass. You are no longer vulnerable to the old traps of abuse or gaslighting, because you have grown immune to them through awareness. But application is not merely about self-protection. It is about guiding others, living as a beacon for those still wandering in darkness. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In this stage, you embody that truth fully. Your energy is no longer scattered, but directed. Your words carry the weight of experience, and your presence radiates clarity. You move with confidence, not because you have no wounds, but because you have transformed your wounds into wisdom. Through recognition, integration, and application, the empath evolves from a fragile soul to a force of resilience, balance, and inspiration, proving that spirituality is not only about inner reflection, but about embodying wisdom in daily life, where spiritual awakening becomes visible, not in words, but in the way you live. Don't forget to subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom for more insights on Carl Jung's stages of transformation and how you can turn your empathic journey into a source of true power. 7. Balanced warriors. The empath who reaches the stage, Carl Jung described as dangerous, does not lose their warmth or their humanity, but instead becomes a balanced warrior whose compassion is no longer scattered everywhere, but guided with wisdom and intention. They no longer feel compelled to heal every wound they encounter or sacrifice themselves endlessly. But instead, they learn to be selectively generous, offering their time, energy, and love only where it can truly create transformation. This shift does not make them cold. It makes them powerful, for they begin to reshape family patterns, social systems, and even unspoken dynamics by showing others how to stand in truth without apology. Their life becomes a living demonstration of spirituality in action, a living embodiment of spiritual awakening, because they prove that empathy does not mean weakness. It means knowing when to give, when to protect, and when to stand firm. Their presence itself becomes a mirror that cannot be ignored, for people around them either evolve in the light of that truth or feel exposed by it. These balanced warriors walk through the world like lighthouses. They do not chase ships, yet ships are forced to navigate differently in their glow. They become living mirrors, reflecting the reality of every interaction without distortion, which means manipulation, emotional dependency, or self-deception cannot survive in their orbit. This is not cruelty, but clarity, and in that clarity, others are invited into growth. They carry themselves with quiet authority, embodying the paradox of softness and strength, able to love deeply without losing themselves, able to stand alone without becoming hardened. Their no carries the same sacred weight as their yes, teaching those around them that dignity, truth, and boundaries are non-negotiable. They understand that saying no to what drains them is saying yes to their higher purpose, and this makes them both more generous and more discerning. Their empathy is no longer a leak, but a force, no longer a burden, but a gift refined by fire. Balanced warriors are not rescuers who carry others' pain, but guides who show by example how to carry one's own. They heal without enabling dysfunction, offer clarity without cruelty, and love without losing themselves. In their relationships, accountability becomes natural, honesty becomes the foundation, and love is no longer measured by endless sacrifice, but by the health and balance it creates. Their lives remind us that the true measure of empathy is not how much you give away, but how much truth and transformation your giving produces. They are proof that when empathy matures, it does not die. It becomes strategy, presence, and embodied wisdom that elevates not only themselves, but everyone who has the courage to stand beside them. 8. Evolutionary step in psychology. Carl Jung offered profound spiritual wisdom when he revealed that empaths are not broken or disordered souls, but evolutionarily advanced beings carrying within them a gift that is both heavy and divine. Their path, he explained, is not about hardening the heart or numbing sensitivity, but about moving from unconscious absorption to conscious choice, from being a sponge of the world's emotions to becoming what he beautifully described as love with boundaries. This is the dangerous stage of transformation, not because it harms the empath, but because it makes them untouchable to manipulation, illusion, and control. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this truth becomes the cornerstone of the empath's awakening. When the empath steps out of unconscious patterns and chooses to own their sensitivity, they stop being consumed by the storms around them and instead become the calm within them. This stage is a radical shift, for the empath no longer mistakes self-sacrifice for love or endless giving for virtue. They realize that without boundaries, compassion becomes martyrdom, But with boundaries, compassion becomes medicine. They evolve into mirrors of truth rather than sponges of pain, reflecting back to others the reality of their own souls while staying grounded in their own. They feel deeply, yet remain steady. Love fully, yet protect their essence. Give generously, yet wisely. Jung's spiritual wisdom illuminates this stage as an evolutionary step in psychology, one where sensitivity is no longer seen as weakness, but as a higher potential of human consciousness. The empath who reaches this stage carries a clarity that cuts through chaos, a strength that comes not from walls, but from discernment, and a love that heals without destroying itself. At this level, they are no longer ruled by guilt, shame, or the fear of rejection. They begin to see that their gift is not meant to drown them, but to elevate them into their higher purpose. They embody compassion without losing individuality. They serve without erasing themselves, and they stand as a living contradiction to the false belief that sensitivity must equal fragility. Jung's insight shows us that this is not merely a psychological stage, but a spiritual awakening, where empathy merges with wisdom, sensitivity transforms into strength, and love becomes conscious, chosen, and enduring. It is an inner revolution that makes the empath dangerous not to love, but to manipulation, falsehood, and darkness. Because once awakened, they cannot be deceived, and their very presence becomes a force of illumination in a world longing for light. To honor this evolutionary step in psychology, declare your growth. Comment below, "I evolve with wisdom," to affirm your spiritual awakening and inspire others to rise with you. In this video, we explored Carl Jung's powerful insights on the empath's final stage, the point where deep sensitivity can turn from a gift into something truly dangerous if left unbalanced. We learned that when empathy becomes overwhelming, it can blur boundaries, drain energy, and even distort one's sense of self. Yet Jung's wisdom reminds us that awareness is the key. By understanding this stage, we can transform vulnerability into strength and use empathy as a path toward true spiritual wisdom and personal growth. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt the weight of carrying others' emotions as if they were your own? Share your experiences in the comments, and let's learn from each other's journeys. If you found value here, don't forget to like, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and share this video so more people can awaken to the power of conscious empathy. Master your shadow, master your mind. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung once said, "Every shadow we ignore within ourselves becomes a silent puppeteer, shaping our thoughts, emotions, and choices without us even realizing it." On Spiritual Wisdom, we believe that mastering your shadow is not about eliminating darkness, but about transforming it into the very fuel that awakens your true mind and spirit. As you listen, I invite you to reflect. What hidden patterns or fears might be guiding your life right now? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the first step toward freedom is daring to name what has been unseen. 1. The shadow. What it is and why it matters. The shadow is not an external demon to be feared, but the hidden side of your own psyche, the place where you've buried emotions, impulses, and traits that you were told were unacceptable since childhood: anger, envy, selfishness, sadness. Yet repressing these parts never destroys them. They remain alive, influencing your decisions, shaping your relationships, and silently dictating the course of your life. Jung's warning rings true. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The shadow is not evil in nature. It is unconscious, like a locked room in your own house that you refuse to enter. But inside that room is not only pain, it is also power, creativity, and untapped wisdom waiting for you to reclaim it. Many men, well into their 30s, 40s, or 60s, live under its influence without realizing it. They repeat destructive patterns, fall into the same broken relationships, lose themselves in the same conflicts, and wonder why life feels like an endless loop of disappointment. They call it destiny or bad luck, but it is the shadow at work, quietly pulling the strings from the background. Think of it as a reservoir of energy. Denied and ignored, it leaks into your life as uncontrolled rage, jealousy, despair. But faced directly, it becomes fuel for an inner fire that can be directed towards self-mastery, clarity, and purpose. This is why Jung insisted that wholeness does not come from rejecting the shadow, but from integrating it, because only then do you stand in the truth of your full humanity. In today's world, where men are told to hide fear, bury sadness, and never show weakness, the need to face the shadow is even more urgent. Suppressed emotions do not vanish. They build pressure, like a volcano waiting to erupt. And when they do, they destroy families, careers, and inner peace. Spirituality teaches us that light cannot exist without shadow. Both are necessary for wholeness. Spiritual awakening is not about pretending to be eternally positive, but about embracing the entire spectrum of who you are. If you felt restless, lost, or haunted by choices that make no sense, it is the shadow calling, urging you to listen. The path of integration requires courage because it demands radical honesty. It means admitting that you are capable of envy, rage, selfishness, and weakness. But the paradox is this: once acknowledged, these traits lose their destructive power and become tools for growth. A man who denies his anger becomes its prisoner, exploding unpredictably. A man who accepts his anger learns to channel it into boundaries, leadership, and strength. The shadow, once faced, becomes a teacher that sharpens your awareness, reveals your projections, and helps you act with greater intention rather than blind reaction. This practice begins in the smallest moments. Notice when your emotions feel larger than the situation at hand. Ask yourself, what is truly happening inside me? What am I refusing to see? Write it down, sit with it, or speak with someone you trust. Discomfort is not an enemy, it is a doorway. Each time you uncover a hidden piece of your shadow, you reclaim a lost fragment of your soul. Over time, this work leads to clarity, resilience, and a steady center from which no storm can easily shake you. To master the shadow is to accept that you are both light and darkness, both strong and vulnerable, both noble and flawed. This acceptance frees you from the exhausting battle of pretending, of wearing masks, of running from yourself. It allows you to step fully into your life with authenticity, presence, and power. This is more than psychology. It is a spiritual awakening, a return to wholeness that transforms not only how you see yourself, but how you move through the world, shaping your relationships, your work, and the legacy you leave behind. Have you ever faced your shadow and discovered what it was trying to teach you? If so, Share your experience in the comments to inspire others. If not, comment "I will face it" so we can walk this path of self-mastery together. 2. The psychological cost of repression. When you repress the shadow within, it does not disappear. It lingers in the unconscious, gathering strength and influencing your life from the darkness. Carl Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Every unacknowledged wound, every denied emotion, every hidden part of yourself continues to act in silence, shaping your choices, your relationships, and even your mental and physical well-being. Anxiety that strikes without warning, depression that drains your spirit, self-sabotage that undermines your goals, sudden emotional outbursts, chronic guilt, and lingering shame are not random weaknesses of character. They are signs of the shadow pressing against the walls you built to contain it. Left unaddressed, repression leads to toxic relationship patterns, cycles of guilt, and a sense of inner fragmentation that makes you feel divided, incomplete, and estranged from your own essence. Repression gains much of its strength through the persona, the mask you wear to survive in society, to win approval, to appear strong or agreeable, even when your inner truth is suffering. Jung described the persona as necessary but dangerous when mistaken for your authentic self. You may laugh when you want to cry, agree when your heart says no, or suppress your anger for fear of being judged. In doing so, you create a polished mask that pleases others but betrays your soul. As Shakespeare once observed, God has given you one face, and you make yourself another. That second face may protect you for a time, but beneath it, your shadow grows restless, leaking into your dreams, your fears, your sudden overreactions, and the choices you regret but cannot explain. Repressed shadow energy behaves like a caged animal, unseen yet powerful, agitated, and waiting for any chance to escape. It reveals itself in moments when you lash out at someone you love over something trivial, when envy bites at you despite your attempts to feel only joy for another's success, or when shame rises suddenly and clouds your sense of worth. These contradictions reveal a deeper truth. What is denied within does not vanish. It grows more insistent in silence. Nietzsche captured this danger when he wrote, "Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster." By repressing your shadow for too long, you risk being consumed by the very forces you refuse to face. The path of spiritual wisdom, illuminated by Carl Jung's insights, calls you not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it, to reclaim the parts of yourself that you abandoned. To admit your anger is to find its hidden lesson in boundaries and courage rather than destruction. To embrace your vulnerability is to discover deeper authenticity and the power of genuine human connection. Integration is not perfection, it is wholeness, and wholeness ends the war within. The mind cannot be mastered while it is divided against itself. Each step you take toward integration weakens the grip of repression. The mask becomes unnecessary because your authentic self can breathe freely without fear of rejection. The shadow becomes less an enemy and more a guide, teaching you strength, compassion, and resilience. What once sabotaged you now empowers you, because in facing what was hidden, you claim the fullness of your humanity. Repression is costly, but awareness liberates. When you dare to face your shadow, you reclaim the freedom to live without disguise, without fear, and without shame. 3. Confrontation, not suppression, is the cure. You must consciously confront your shadow to stop being ruled by it, because every time you try to suppress it, you only give it more power. Though it may feel easier to look away, Carl Jung taught us that you are not just your good side. You are also what you fear most to admit. Facing that fear is uncomfortable, but it is also the birthplace of healing and resilience, the place where spiritual wisdom becomes reality, and where true spiritual growth begins to take root. Think about how this plays out in modern life. A man named David, always calm at work, suddenly explodes when a colleague questions him, not because of the question itself, but because deep down, he still carries the weight of being dismissed and overlooked as a child. The shadow memory of "I am not respected" fuels his anger, and until he turns inward to acknowledge it, the pattern repeats. The moment David stops and admits, "This isn't only about today, it's about old pain I've been carrying," he opens the door to understanding rather than lashing out. And in that single act of honesty, the shadow loses its grip. Jung warned us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That truth explains why so many of us keep stumbling into the same mistakes. We are not cursed. We are simply unconscious of what drives us. Confronting our shadow is how we break that loop. This practice is not self-condemnation, but self-respect. Because the shadow does not only hide wounds, it also conceals gifts. Your anger may contain the courage to protect what matters. Your jealousy may reveal the path your soul longs to walk. Your perfectionism may be reshaped into a pursuit of excellence that inspires instead of shames. When you dare to bring these forces into the light, you stop being torn apart by them and instead become strengthened by them. So whenever you feel a strong reaction, pause and breathe. Name the emotion without judgment. Ask yourself, what is this really protecting? And then listen. Write down the answer. And, if needed, take a small outer step. Apologize, set a boundary, or ask for help. Because integration is not just insight, it is action that heals. Over time, with daily practice, you will notice that you no longer feel hijacked by sudden reactions, that your decisions grow clearer and your energy more grounded. The mind begins to trust you to tell the truth and no longer needs to defend itself with denial. This is how you master your mind by mastering your shadow. The lessons are simple, but life-changing. Facing discomfort is the doorway to growth. Naming your emotions reduces their control. Asking what they protect uncovers hidden needs. Taking small, conscious actions integrates your discoveries. And repeating this practice daily rewires your inner world. When you live this way, you honor your spirituality not with distant ideals, but with real courage. You expand your spiritual growth not by pretending to be pure, but by embracing the wholeness of who you are, and you finally begin to experience the freedom of a life no longer ruled by what you fear to admit. Leave your like, subscribe to our channel Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss powerful insights like this. And to affirm your commitment to true healing, type in the comments, "I confront my shadow and transform my mind." 4. The role of archetypes in shadow integration. During the process of shadow work, Carl Jung revealed that archetypes are not distant theories, but living forces that rise from the unconscious, shaping our emotions, decisions, and patterns in ways we often fail to notice. They are like invisible actors in the theater of the mind, sometimes guiding us, sometimes deceiving us, but always carrying a lesson. Among the most powerful archetypes that appear are the anima and animus, the self, and the trickster. And learning to recognize their presence becomes a turning point in both spirituality and spiritual awakening. For they can either illuminate your path or pull you back into the very darkness you are trying to escape. The anima and animus embody the inner feminine and masculine energies that live within every person. For men, the anima brings forth intuition, sensitivity, and the capacity to feel beyond logic, qualities that are often repressed in cultures that define masculinity only through toughness and control. To deny her is to deny half of your soul, but to embrace her is to find a balance that makes you more whole, compassionate, and deeply connected to life. The animus, in turn, represents structure, discipline, and decisiveness, helping you act with clarity and conviction when the world demands strength. Together, they act as bridges between the conscious and unconscious, teaching that true masculinity is not rigid dominance, but a dance between softness and strength, logic and intuition, discipline and creativity. When you honor both, you gain the courage to meet yourself fully without fear. Beyond these two figures lies the archetype of the self, the symbol of wholeness and integration. The self is not the ego, it is larger, containing both the light you proudly show and the shadow you try to bury. Spiritual traditions across cultures describe it as the higher self, the divine spark, the soul's true essence. When the self appears, often in dreams, visions, or in moments of crisis that strip away illusions, it calls you to live authentically, to shed the masks that society has forced on you, and to realize that real power lies not in conquering others, but in aligning with your inner truth. To awaken the self is to see that freedom is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to live as a whole being who accepts every part of himself, both the luminous and the dark. Yet shadow work is never without resistance, and that resistance often comes in the form of the trickster. This archetype thrives on inversion, disruption, and ego traps, leading you into self-sabotage or convincing you that you have already mastered yourself when you have only scratched the surface. The trickster whispers through temptation, pride, or complacency, trying to pull you back into old habits just when you are ready to break free. He is not there to destroy you, but to test whether your awakening is real or simply another mask. Many men stumble here, confusing fleeting progress for lasting transformation. But those who learn to recognize the trickster's games gain sharper awareness and deeper humility. In this way, even the trickster becomes a teacher, forcing you to refine your vigilance and deepen your commitment to the path. The anima and animus open the way to balance. The self points toward wholeness, and the trickster keeps you from arrogance and stagnation. Together, they create a map of the psyche, showing that your shadow is not an enemy to be feared, but a frontier to be explored. To face these forces with honesty is to master not only the hidden parts of your being, but also the restless mind that so often controls you. To integrate them is to experience a spiritual awakening that reshapes how you love, how you lead, and how you live. In the very depths of the unconscious, where darkness seems overwhelming, lies the key to becoming the man you were destined to be: whole, awake, and unshakably free. 5. Emotional intelligence through shadow work. When you choose to integrate your shadow instead of hiding from it, you begin to notice a remarkable shift in how you move through life. Because as Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think of those moments when the smallest comment ignites a storm inside you, or when familiar frustrations keep circling back. These are not random accidents, but signals from the shadow, urging you to listen. When you finally turn toward them with spiritual wisdom, you become less reactive and more self-aware, not by suppressing emotions, but by learning to interpret their deeper meaning. The shadow holds enormous energy that, when ignored, becomes chaos, but when embraced, transforms into clarity, creativity, and emotional balance. Each time you acknowledge a fear, uncover the jealousy beneath your anger, or recognize a judgment that mirrors your own wound, you reclaim psychic energy that was once wasted on hiding. That energy becomes available for your art, your problem solving, your relationships, and the steady presence that draws others to you. This is the turning point where projection loses its grip. Instead of pushing your hidden insecurities or suppressed anger onto others, you pause and ask, what is this reaction teaching me about myself? In that moment of humility, you break free from blame and step into authorship of your life. Jung reminded us that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And this truth creates a bridge from conflict to self-knowledge. With practice, authenticity takes root in your daily life. You speak your truth with kindness, feel your emotions without drowning in them, set boundaries with calm strength, and discover that inner peace is not something to chase, but something that quietly arises when you stop pretending. Emotional strength, in this light, is not a hardened shield, but a supple resilience, the ability to hold grief without collapse, to welcome joy without clinging, to face criticism without breaking, and to admit mistakes without shame. Imagine a simple, everyday scenario. Your partner forgets a promise, your coworker interrupts you, or a driver cuts you off in traffic. Instead of reacting with instant heat, you can treat the surge within you as information, not instruction. By naming the feeling, tracing its root, and asking what it protects, you create space to respond with intention, whether that means calmly stating your need, setting a clear boundary, or choosing to reinterpret the situation with generosity. Slowly, these choices accumulate, and your mind no longer feels like a battlefield of impulses, but like a council where every part of you has a voice, and you, the conscious self, hold steady authority. Carl Jung also warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the essence of shadow work, not running from darkness, but using it as raw material for growth. When you embrace this process, you transform hidden pain into wisdom, confusion into clarity, and inner tension into creative force. By bringing light into your own depths, you become less reactive and more aware. You stop projecting pain onto others, and you cultivate authenticity that feels natural and unshakable. Through Carl Jung's teachings and the path of spiritual wisdom, the message is clear. True emotional intelligence is born not from escaping your shadow, but from befriending it. Because only then can you unlock the creativity, balance, and quiet strength that were always waiting for you. If you're still with us on this journey of mastering emotional intelligence through shadow work, comment below. I'm aware of my emotions. Your feedback helps us grow and connect deeper with you. 6. Practical daily tools for shadow integration. Every one of us carries a hidden side, what Carl Jung called the shadow. And it is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a part of you waiting to be understood, embraced, and transformed. To keep this shadow integrated requires daily practices that ground you in awareness, honesty, and courage, because real spirituality and spiritual growth are not about escaping what is dark, but shining light into it. Self-observation is the first tool. The art of watching your triggers and reactions with calm attention. When you feel jealousy, anger, or insecurity arise, instead of reacting blindly, pause and ask yourself what deeper wound is being touched. A common example is when a colleague receives praise and you feel overlooked. The irritation is not just about the moment. It is a signal from the shadow, reminding you of an old story about not being valued. By noticing it, you loosen its grip and turn what could have been another cycle of bitterness into a chance for awareness. Reflective journaling builds on this by taking the storm of thoughts and emotions out of your head and placing them on paper. Writing slows you down and forces clarity, exposing repeated patterns you might otherwise miss. Over time, you may see that every time you feel criticized, you retreat or grow defensive. And through writing, you trace this back to childhood moments of rejection. By giving the shadow a voice through your journal, you take away its power to control you from the dark. Because what is written is no longer hidden. Dream analysis opens yet another door. Because your unconscious speaks at night in symbols and images. A recurring dream of being chased might be your psyche showing you what truths you are avoiding in waking life. When you track and reflect on these dreams, you are in dialogue with the deepest layers of yourself, receiving guidance from within that no outside teacher can give you. Mindfulness then anchors you in the present, teaching you that between stimulus and response lies a sacred pause where freedom lives. If someone cuts you off on the road, your shadow may want to explode in rage, but with mindfulness, you can take a breath and choose patience. It is not about suppressing the anger, but meeting it with awareness, transforming a reflex into a conscious choice. Boundary setting is equally essential, because every time you say yes when you mean no, you feed the shadow of resentment and self-betrayal. Protecting your needs and energy is not selfish, but an act of integrity. When you decline a request you cannot fulfill, you affirm your worth, and in doing so, you prevent hidden anger from festering in the unconscious. Periodic persona check-ins are the final practice, especially relevant in an age where social media constantly tempts us to project masks of success, happiness, or perfection. Asking yourself, what am I hiding to fit in, keeps you honest about the roles you play. Perhaps you always act strong when you feel weak, or pretend to be endlessly positive while sadness weighs on you. By noticing these masks, you begin to strip them away and allow your true self to emerge. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege is only possible when the shadow is welcomed instead of denied. The lesson is clear. Observe your triggers to reclaim freedom. Journal to uncover patterns. Study your dreams to hear your soul. Practice mindfulness to meet life with presence. Set boundaries to protect your worth, and question your masks to return to authenticity. These daily tools are not just practices, but pathways back to wholeness. reminding you that mastering the shadow is not about destroying darkness, but about integrating it into light. And in that integration lies the heart of true spirituality and spiritual growth. 7. This is a lifelong journey, not a quick fix. Shadow integration is not a quick solution that you can apply once and be done with. It is a lifelong journey, a discipline that requires patience, honesty, and courage. As you grow, new layers of your shadow surface, revealing aspects of yourself you thought were resolved, but are simply waiting for the right moment to show themselves. You may conquer one form of fear, only to discover another hidden beneath a new responsibility or relationship. You may believe you have overcome anger, only to realize it still lingers when life challenges you in unexpected ways. This is why Carl Jung insisted that the more you evolve, the more refined your awareness must become. Awareness must be sharpened like a blade, because only with clarity can you see the subtle ways your shadow still shapes your choices, your words, and your daily habits. Without this awareness, you risk being controlled by what you refuse to acknowledge. Jung warned that ignoring the shadow invites chronic psychological suffering, and you can see this truth all around you. The man who hides his insecurity behind arrogance ends up alone and misunderstood. The man who refuses to face his unresolved anger distracts himself with work, alcohol, or endless busyness. But inside, he is breaking down. Suppression does not eliminate the shadow. It makes it stronger, a silent master pulling the strings of your life from the dark. This is the tragedy of a man who avoids himself and becomes imprisoned by what he refuses to face. But when you dare to turn toward the shadow and confront it with honesty, something powerful happens. You reclaim your freedom, your strength, and your wholeness. You no longer live as a divided man, one part polished for the world, while another hides in shame and fear. You live as an integrated man, unafraid of the truth that resides within you. The rewards of this integration are profound. By embracing your shadow, you transform weakness into wisdom, fear into power, and shame into authenticity. You begin to walk with a sense of inner authority because nothing within you is being denied. This is the essence of spirituality. It is not about pretending to be pure light, nor about escaping suffering, but about holding both your light and darkness in balance. True spiritual awakening comes when you no longer run from yourself, when you allow every part of your being to be seen, understood, and embraced. The shadow you fear is not your enemy, but the hidden doorway to your liberation. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. By making your shadow conscious, you no longer stumble blindly into repeating patterns. You rise above them and take control of your own destiny. This is the work of a lifetime, but it is also the path to becoming a whole and powerful man. 8. Final message: choose truth over comfort. Mastering the shadow, as Carl Jung revealed, is a one-way path. Once you uncover what has been buried in the darkness, you cannot turn back or unsee it. The shadow is not some distant concept. It is the hidden side of your own soul. The parts of you that you deny, repress, or try to bury beneath the polished mask of social acceptance. Yet these denied aspects do not disappear. They sink into the unconscious, shaping your life silently, creating patterns you may mistakenly call fate. Jung's warning echoes here. Until you make the unconscious conscious, It will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Facing your shadow is not about destroying who you are. It is about reclaiming the lost fragments of your spirit and integrating them into your wholeness. Real transformation demands courage, for it asks you to confront not only the parts of yourself that shine, but also the ones that sting the anger, jealousy, grief, and longing you try to hide. These emotions linger like shadows, whispering from the depths until you finally turn to face them. By stepping into this confrontation, you begin the true work of spiritual wisdom, where spirituality is no longer about light alone, but about making the darkness conscious and using it as a source of growth. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, Jung reminds us. And it is this courageous confrontation that opens the door to authentic awakening. The shadow, once feared as an enemy, becomes your greatest teacher. It strips away illusions, revealing the truth of who you are beneath every mask, every pretense, every desperate attempt to be accepted. In this raw honesty, you discover freedom. When you have faced the worst within yourself, you become emotionally unshakable. No insult, rejection, or opinion can destabilize you, because you have already walked through the fire of your own depths. You begin to live authentically, rooted in an aliveness that others can sense immediately. Those who walk this path radiate presence, because they no longer trade their truth for approval. They embody a life aligned with reality rather than illusion. To choose this journey is to choose truth over comfort. Comfort keeps you trapped in the same cycles, but truth liberates you, even if it first burns. This is the essence of spiritual awakening. It is not about ignoring what hurts, but about embracing it, transforming it, and allowing it to shape you into someone fully alive. The question you must ask yourself is simple. Do you want to remain in comfort, or do you want to live in truth? If you are ready, speak it into existence as a commitment to your own growth. Comment, "I am willing to face my shadow," as a declaration that you choose courage, authenticity, and awakening over the illusion of safety. Throughout this journey, we've explored Carl Jung's powerful insight that by facing and mastering your shadow, you unlock the key to mastering your own mind. True growth begins not by denying the darker parts of ourselves, but by integrating them, transforming hidden fears into wisdom and inner strength. As you step away from this video, I encourage you to reflect. What part of your shadow is asking to be acknowledged today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story may inspire someone else on their path. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Spiritual Wisdom for more guidance on your journey towards self-mastery and inner peace.